Fascinating. Thanks, Darren. Also, I've made so many notes. Probably could have asked so many questions, but yeah. Just to touch on your point there, Melissa, I think it's important because I immediately thought about the Gnostics, and they taught that all knowledge on everything was in the individual, and it lay latent in each of us, but you had to bring it forward as the individual. You had to bring it forward to seek that truth, and that was the beginning of the journey to seek truth. And I think I would echo what you said about Quigley. I think he's a good historian. I think the book is full of information. I'm glad that I took the time to read through it. But really, compared to Alan's work, for me, Alan's work exceeds what we perceive to be a historian. So I echo what you're saying. So, and it's been a journey for me reading this book, and I suppose that's also why I'm here, is to try and share some of the information, because when I started reading Quigley, I always, of course, I'd found Alan and read a lot of the books that Alan had suggested, and of course read Alan's books, and there was always something missing within Quigley's work. I found there's lots of truth in it, don't get me wrong, absolutely. So I would advise anybody to read it if they can, put themselves through the trauma of reading such a massive book, but it's certainly worth a read. But it is about trying to seek truth, and I just always find that there's something missing. But in Alan's work, it's absolutely complete for me. Everything is there. Everything is there. It's on a total different level. But let's have a go at reviewing the last chapter, I suppose, in Quigley's work. European Ambiguities. It's an interesting title. It's an interesting little study just to study Quigley's titles. So we'll see if there's any double meanings here. Yeah, there's so much information. So I've really just focused on a few things and tried to share my experience, tried to share my search for truth as well with this. So we've got the formation of the European Union, and Tragedy and Hope tells us that a new Europe is being formed, which will be vastly different from pre-war Europe, which was a political struggle between conservative, liberal and social factions, and these divisions in Europe go way back, and this culminated and quickly tells us that the reasons were selfish interests, old slogans and doctrinaire hatreds, which is a truth. It's absolutely a truth. He also tells us that old institutions are barriers in the way for this utopian Europe. You see, because everything must be new. Yeah, everything must be new. Everybody's seeking for a new experience or a new religion or a new car or whatever it is. It must be new. But these old institutions, I really took to mean that this was the pillars of society that needed to be destroyed. Religion, the family unit, mother and father, the bonding of the male and female. Melissa's just give us perfect examples of this system that it was done. It was done before, for me, it was done before Quigley wrote this book. And a long time ago. That these are the pillars, these are the old institutions that need to be taken away. And the system's doing a good job at it. And Quigley does tell us that this will be done by merging the old into the new. Religion will be merged into socialism, just like Melissa just said. It's scientism. Yeah, science is the new God. Christian charity into social welfare. And this Quigley calls an unnatural alliance between clergy and capitalism. Now, it might be an unnatural alliance, but I really read that as a marriage made in heaven. Because, in ancient times, the priesthoods were the lawyers. They administered the laws, which are all economic based. They kept all records, all private and public matters. They dealt with all the legal disputes of the day, gave out the judgments, decrees, and Alan is ban on it. Ancient cities, trading cities, whatever you want to call them, administration cities are being uncovered today. And they tell us that this lawful or legal system is older than the history we are given. And we can look into Çatalhöyük. Alan mentions this in Waiting for the Miracle, which I found to be a very similar word to Catholic. Which means universal, of course, but you've got that Çatalhöyük. It's of course chattel and cattle, but no relation to what Quigley says. But I do think that Quigley doesn't have much to say about Catholics, so maybe answers your question, Melissa. But you can also look into, another brotherhood, the Comacines, who were the builders of all the cathedrals over Europe. Again, Alan gives you this nod. You're meant to take it and go and see what you can find. But they originated from Lake Como, between 500 and 700 AD. But once you dig into the history, you'll find that they actually go back to Rome. And they migrated from the collegia in Rome, so that was the guilds in Rome, and moved to their base in Lake Como when Rome started to be invaded or falling apart, which of course is a myth too. But they had contracts with all the royal houses across Europe, down to the minutest details, like how many hours were to be worked for a man, board and lodging payments, if a man fell off the scaffolds and was killed, who was liable, or who was liable if materials fell off the scaffold and killed somebody underneath, in the minutest detail. But Alan did tell us to take notice of this band of merry men, the master builders, because you have to ask yourself, all over incessant wars, never-ending wars, I really laugh. You can see the devastation that the world wars have brought on. But in Europe, the World War I and World War II are misnomers, because it's just full of wars, constant, incessant wars that never end. And how does this brotherhood get through that unhindered? This takes collusion, this takes coordination. It's a massive project. Some of these cathedrals took, 400, 500 years to build. This is organized, because you're dealing with a religion here. Who funded all these building projects? It really tells you the banking system, the control of goods, men, and materials is older than our history. And the history we're given is nothing new. It's an international brotherhood, and always has been. Quigley now tells us about the new priesthood running the show, the formation of new revolutionary organizations. So we've got constant revolutions. The new master builders, and he informs us of organizations and conferences which are almost dizzying to try and comprehend. But I think that is by design, because we're not really meant to understand this. But he rattles them off, and for this purpose it's probably good to do it too. So the Organisation of European Economic Cooperation, Organisation of Economic Cooperation Development, was a Hague Congress for Europe, Council of Europe. And there's many more in this, and it just, a thought came to me when I was reading this, that Quigley tells us in the book that in Germany, and in fact across the board in other countries, the military personnel, there were hundreds of thousands of military personnel employed. But he tells us there's only a very small percentage are actually battle ready. Very tiny percentage. We know they ramped up for World War I's and World War II. So we can see that, and lots of people were put to slaughter. But in general, there's only a small percentage of personnel that are actually ready for battle. So most of these never saw the field of battle. So it told me that a massive chunk of these people are bureaucrats, they're lawyers, they're in administration roles, diplomacy roles, whatever. And, another thought sprung to my mind about the devil's advocate, where Pacino said that we're going to rule the world with an army of lawyers. So I really don't think anything has changed since ancient times. These are revolutionary organizations. So this all ends up in the setup of the European coal and steel community. So very important what he tells us here. So they were erected with sovereign powers, a supranational body. They controlled prices, channeled investment. What else were they channeling? They raised funds, raised from the dead, I suppose. They allocated coal and steel in times of shortages, and they raised funds by taxation independent of governments. Yeah. So these organizations made decisions which were binding by a majority vote without required in most international organizations of sovereign states. And it's funny how he words these things. I read that, and I read what popped out at me was this international organizations of sovereign states. And I immediately thought, yes, it's like the United States of America or the Union of Socialist Soviet Republic. Yeah, I think Quigley's mocking us here. This IOSS, the I of OSS, and we know how important intelligence agencies are in setting this up. So Quigley's telling us here that sovereign states are international organizations. And Alan did mention often, he said he implored us to ask, what is it that we're actually fighting to preserve? But Quigley goes on, so the European coal and steel community was a rudimentary government with a common assembly for the commoners, of course, because there's a high priesthood at work, obviously. So they gave themselves authority over and above national governments with its own courts of justice to settle disputes. The setup of this included the political parties of the Conservatives, Socialists and Liberals. Again, I thought so much for a new Europe. It looks like the same techniques, if you ask me. Yeah. Because the so-called elected governments that have sold out, they're in bed. They were bought off a long time ago. So the ECSC abolished internal trade barriers to oil and steel. Now this is important, because it's one of the aspects of, I was thinking about why Germany has been targeted a lot, and I don't know if I've found the correct reasoning why. Quigley's adamant that Germany are a problem and they could destroy Europe. I think he's very biased in that, but certainly with oil. Now Germany has massive oil and gas reserves. I think the last time I looked, they were pumping, they were creating about 21 million barrels a year. So massive oil and gas reserves, and I'm sure if they actually, I think they import something like $750 billion a year from Russia. Now, if they took that money and invested it in their own I was pretty sure would probably come up with, their own usage. I'm pretty sure they could, but it's not meant to be that way, because you've got these big international organisations running the show. So, yeah, they abolished these internal trade barriers, and they set up a common tariff against imports of coal and steel. They modernised the coal industry and closed down exhausted mines, moving hundreds of thousands of workers into other employment. Yeah, moved into bullshit jobs. That's right. But production was booming. It literally exploded, because most of this steel goes to the weapons manufacturer. I think he actually meant the exploded. He meant the profits for the big boys, to be honest. But he told us this boom was down to low wage levels and lows for exporting to international markets, so globalism. So he gives us an example of the VW, as you say in Germany, the VW, which stands for the Volkswagen, the people's car, because the people, they pay for it over and over. And I thought to myself, doesn't a car really resemble a human being? I mean, it's got an engine, like the heart for circulating the life juices. It's got headlights for the eyes, let the light in or out. The windscreen is the head or the brain, where you see in or see out, using the mind's eye, of course. The side mirrors are the ears. The grille sucks in the air, and you have to fill the car up with, some kind of spirit to move it or to animate it. And the car is 4 feet, of course, so maybe that's why we have horsepower or car names like the Ford Mustang or the Jaguar. Maybe that's the reason. But yes, so the tragedy in hope goes on here. The low labour costs arose from Eastern refugees flooding. He's talking about Germany here, but we know this happened all across Europe, and migrations of people is key to this system. It always has been since ancient times. It's divide and conquer. So this growth was based on steady demand, meaning, our ideas and choices are really marketed to us. You've got high rates of investment, which means that these big monopolies just pump their profits back into the system. It's really like feeding Moloch, and liberal fiscal and financial policies, which tax breaks, tax incentives, so these cartels can just skim off the top and line their own pockets. It's never changed. It's always been the same. And so we go on through the creation of more supranational agencies. I mean, is your head in a spin yet? Because mine's is and mine's was. The European defence community, and these are not all of them. There's tons of them. We don't even know how many there is. Quigley's mentioned some here. The European defence community, which eventually became NATO or combined with NATO, and the Western European Union were set up to form a European government. So out of all this political shenanigans going on behind the scenes, a new economic integrated flowed out in the form of the Rome Treaty. That's right, the Rome Treaty in March 1957. So out of this magic spring flowed the European Economic Community, which was called the Common Market for the commoners, and the European Atomic Community. But Quigley does tell us that all factions were on board. And this Rome Treaty was also set up to abolish trade tariffs and set up common tariff, reduction in national tariffs, which is really, reduction in state monies, all by design. That's why, police and there's no, the police are being completely your cities are being depoliced and there's no cleaners on the streets anymore. Libraries are closing down. Your local amenities are just being destroyed. And this is why. So Quigley goes on here. This also, the Rome Treaty was set up for free movement of persons. We've just said migrations of people is key to this. So services and so there's free movement of persons, services and capital within the community. Also to industrialise the backward and underdeveloped regions. No one is safe from this monstrosity. Yeah. Again, he tells us these international organisations have been set up with a high commission tied by, to quote Quigley here, exercise their functions in complete independence of their national governments. Oh, this is Quigley's contradicting himself here, because he's just told us that the government officials are on all sides, on all the religious groups are all on board. So it's not in complete independence of your national governments. They're all on board. So the Rome Treaty had its own courts of justice, a European Investment Bank to channel funds for integration, and Overseas Development Fund to integrate colonial territories. Now, the International Bank of Settlements was set up for this purpose, but I'm not too sure if this was the function here, but it was set up to do this. A European Social Fund for industrial retraining and unemployment compensation, because the flaws are built into the system, and many politicians have said what Margaret Thatcher has said. Merkel said pretty much the same thing, that a generation, the youth will grow up and they won't have any work, and that's what you see today. There's no work for them. The amount of unemployed and people, you know, sucking off of daddy state is shocking. But Quigley spells it out for us here. And to quote him, these organisations have some of the aspects of sovereignty from the fact that their decisions do not have to be unanimous, are binding on states and on citizens who have not agreed to them, and can be financed by funds that may be levied without current consent of the persons being taxed. On the whole, the supranational aspects of these institutions will be strengthened in the future from provisions in the treaties themselves. All this is very relevant to the marks up of the disintegration of the modern unified sovereign state and the redistribution of its power to multi-level hierarchical structures remotely resembling the structure of the Holy Roman Empire in the last medieval period. So nothing has changed. This ancient system of control it looks like it's gone on forever. But so Quigley's telling us here he's actually telling us, tacitly telling us that basically what a sovereign state is, why it was set up, and what it was set up to do. So in a sovereign state, the decisions made are made without the consent of the citizens. We really have no rights. If you really look at it, we have no rights as a citizen. And as a citizen, you have your decisions made for you by a multi-level hierarchical structure way above politics. In fact, they are pirates of the high sea. They are lawless. And these decisions are binding, and that financing for persuading or coercing the people can be levied from the taxpayer without the consent of the people, because you need to give your consent to this system. That's why they use a lot of propaganda. So your silence is acquiesce, of course, but they use hell of a lot of propaganda to persuade or coerce you into this system. That these laws implemented actually enhance the disintegration of sovereign states and redistribute the power of the people to the new feudal overlords. So the sovereign state was set up to destroy itself. And that's what Alan says about masonry or architecture. They build a church and you dismantle the church. It's really, and it's a never-ending story. But Alan did give the example in ancient Scotland, and Scotland was covered in many independent clans, all paying their allegiances to a sovereign king. You know, it was interesting what Melissa was saying there, because, you know, in my studies, that kingly system, that royal system, is ancient, and we don't really know how old it is. We really don't know. But it was, you know, it was the kings and the nobles, and then you had the taxmen, and that's true, and then you had the serfs under them. But that system was there for 1,000 years, at least. It's probably much older, and that system worked. Yeah, those people could not be corrupted under that system. There was very little deviancy, whatever you want to think about that system. People were taken care of. The families were strong, and they also knew that people weren't born equal. That was also part of it. The class structure worked. So it's interesting what Melissa says there, because that's exactly what I've read too. But yeah, so the royal kingdoms of ancient times, they go deep into history, actually, yeah, in folklore as well. And yeah, it was interesting about the Gaelic or Gauldic, because a lot of ancient writers tell you that there was languages before the Gaelic or the Gauldic, but we don't have they tell us they're lost in the sands of time, so we don't have the historical archives, but I'm sure a bureaucratic priesthood does. Absolutely. But the important character here is this William Wallace character, and maybe you've seen some Hollywood information films. But he was used to unite all the clans of Scotland to fight these English invaders, you know, the bad men coming from over that hill. And that eventually Scotland routed the English at Bannockburn, and Robert the Bruce became the first king of Scotland. So all the clans were centralised under one monarch. Yeah, and this Robert de Bruce was born in France. He was of Norman descent, and he introduced a taxation across the whole country, so a national tax across the whole of Scotland, an economic system for the first time. So there's your freedom for you. And that's why that's basically what independent means. It means independence of a moneyed system. We are dependent on it. I mean, now the spin out interdependence, but it means the same thing, under dependence of a moneyed system. So the De Bruzes, they changed their names into the Stuarts, and so it's the Stuarts. So you've got King James, who was the old pretender, and you've got the Bonnie Prince Charlie, the young pretender, and they were both born in Rome. I'm pretty sure James didn't even set foot in Scotland. And Bonnie Prince Charlie was in Scotland for about 6 months or so, allegedly, and roused up the rebels. But anyway, these Normans, or so-called Northmen, they conquered the entire, you know, kingdom of Europe at that time, and in the royal houses by force, and they introduced a standardised economic system. They introduced the taxmen across Europe, and they taxed the trade routes, crossings, and they basically raided the clans of villagers and enforced paid protection money. That's where you get the word fee from feudal or fief. It means to be protected by a military force, and fee in German just means cattle, and that's where you get the word pecuniary from picus. It's Latin for cattle. So, you know, Europe has been under a feudal system and an economic system for a long time. So Yeah, that's basically and then that there's lots of other treaties, but that's basically the seed of the European Union. But Quigley goes on. I mean, this book was written in 1960s, so we're moving on to de Gaulle now, and what he says about de Gaulle. So Quigley tells us that de Gaulle carried on the plans of the Fourth Republic and left the regime unchanged, and that the educational structure benefited the wealthy, really. High-level technical education, the close alliance with bureaucracy and the industrial system just left it alone. It's basically a technocratic revolving door policy we've got there. And we see that clearly today with technocrats moving from big tech into government, or government moving into banking, or military moving into big tech. It's clear today. De Gaulle, according to Quigley, carried on and Louis XIV, which was a planned bureaucratic society dominated by a pervasive fiscalism, neo-mercantilism. He calls it just a new feudal system. It's the same system, but it's perfected today. It's absolutely perfect. I think de Gaulle for me was somebody that's been used as this opposing force to a united Europe, but I think he was just calling for the same system. I mean, de Gaulle spent 4 years in England when he fled the Nazi invasion of France. I mean, what was he doing in England for 4 years? History is very quiet about de Gaulle in these 4 years. I mean, was he getting his orders there? I don't know. But basically, de Gaulle changed the method of electing the president to a vote by popular vote. Yeah, he bypassed the Senate, changed the constitution by referendum. I think all political parties were up in arms, and the Council of the States called this illegal. And de Gaulle goes on typical propaganda techniques, goes whistle-stop tour, television appearances, regional tours, massive amounts of printed news to sway elections. Was that what was being taught in Britain, because they're the masters of the dark arts, I think. But this is important points which I think Quigley omits here for me. Now, is this the Algerian War from 1945 to 1962? It's 1.5 million people lost their lives in this war. Now, I did find there's a great lecture done. Interesting what Melissa says about the Jesuits, because I found a great lecture done by Yale University, which covers this time in great deal. Actually covers the French system and de Gaulle, and it's an excellent lecture from. I think he was trained in a Jesuit college. You must watch it. It's fantastic. It really does shine a light on what Quigley's writing here too. So it's just a different perspective. And there's also a really good documentary, which is, gives you a little bit of propaganda, of course, by Channel 4 in the 80s. So you can have a look at that. But basically, to break this down, because it's important, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia were pacified or conquered or slaughtered, whatever word you want to use, in 1830 by France. So French settlers are in Algeria. They were called the Pied Noir, the Black Feet, probably because of the black boots worn by the military settlers, the black boots of death, probably. But Algeria at the time was flooded with the criminals from France. Basically, the scum of France was sent there for future agitations, I'm sure. But So there had been constant battles with the local Arab tribes, the Berbers, and the Ottoman Empire was there, and they actually sold white Christian slaves in the 1600s and 1700s, so it was thriving. So the French settlers, these Pied Noirs, were the big landowners there, and there was also, of course, oil reserves, gold, silver, diamonds, lots of natural resources. I'm sure you're surprised. But in 1954, the communist parties of France and Algeria and the National Liberation Front began to agitate the Pied Noirs, the settlers, and there was overthrows of general governors and kidnappings of political members. Military aid was definitely being channeled into there. The CIA were in there too. So you've got all the usual suspects. But the French military and the Pied Noirs in Algeria were terrified of basically France. It was really part of France. It was thought that way by these settlers and thought that way by the French. But they were terrified of being humiliated again after the chaos in Indochina in that century. But not before the French split, in North Vietnam. It became North Vietnam and South Vietnam, probably ready in preparedness for the Russians and the Americans to continue the slaughter of soldiers and civilians there. But so they had this fear. But this kind of kicked off the Algerian War proper. So it was kicked off under a fear of abandonment or rejection from the calls of the independence for Algeria, which really started, it seems like, around World War II, just at the end of World War II. So, and liberty, which the French know all too well, but Algeria were fighting for independence. So what happened next was a perfect example of state-organised terror, using both sides, of course, to wage a war inside one of the largest cities in Africa, Algiers. So the National Front, being orchestrated by the communist parties, began setting off bombs in Algiers, killing many innocent people. There's actually a film done called Algiers, the Battle of Algiers in 1966. It's a very enlightening film. So these bombs went off, and this allowed the French crack troops to come in, the paratroopers, the real psychopaths, and they terrorized and tortured and murdered, lots of the Arab population. I think there's some statistics made by this professor. 50% of men in Algiers were arrested and interrogated. The French military also bombed some of the surrounding villages with fighter bombers, and so it was only where the local tribes. So there was lots of slaughter. I mean, the brutality of the military here is just astounding. If you were against this state police, then you were immediately suspected for terrorism. It's a perfect case of state organised terror. This news was worldwide news at the time because the Liberation and the National Front and the Communist parties were all appealing to the UN, but nothing was done. There was massive street protests with the Algerian Arab population fighting for independence, and of course we know geopolitically that this was happening all over Africa and the world, to be honest, all at the same time. Amazing. It is claimed, and they tried to assassinate de Gaulle. Now, for me, if they're going to assassinate someone, sorry, is somebody trying to get through? Okay.
Sorry, Graham. The recording stopped briefly, so Darren is just recording it again. Please do continue. Please do continue.
Okay, thanks. I think we've been going quite a while, haven't we?
No.
Is your battery?
It just stopped.
Did your batteries run out?
It doesn't. I think it just stops at 4 hours. So
okay,
yeah.
good.
I don't know if actually, you know what? If you could just backtrack a few thoughts
Few
back,
minutes.
that would
Yeah,
be great.
okay.
Yes. Sorry
Yep.
about that.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Good. So we'll maybe back up to yes. So back up to the state organized terror. Yes, both sides basically. Yeah, the French military and the opposing forces, the communists, the national liberation fronts, because they are all fronts, started to wage a war inside the Algiers, which is one of the largest cities, if not the largest city in Africa this year. But anyway, the National Front, they started setting off bombs, yes, that's right, in Algiers, and killing many people. And so the French come in, the paratroopers, the real psychopaths, they come in to terrorize, torture, and murder, a lot of the Arab population. Yeah, it was stated that 50% of men in Algiers, the Arab population, of course, were arrested and interrogated. So the French military actually resorted to bombing some of the villages out in the far outreaching areas, miles out of Algiers, where just Berbers lived. So yeah. So this was news at the time. This was all over the news, because the communist parties and the liberation fronts, they were appealing to the UN, but nothing was done. There was massive street protests. Yeah, and like I said, the situation geopolitically was that this was happening all over Africa and the world. It was a time for liberation, all at the same time, which tells you that it's orchestrated. And of course, we know that the funding was definitely coming in a lot of cases, certainly in Europe, from America. There's lots of aid coming in. So yeah, so then we formed the OAS, so the secret army, they were called. To again, it's funny, it's a misnomer because they didn't do anything secretly. The footage of the situation there is just astounding to watch. But anyway, the OAS tried a putsch at the time against the government in France, and this led to the basically they forced the government's hand to reinstate Charles de Gaulle. I think it was mentioned in the documentary that the paratroopers had actually landed in Corsica, ready to land in France to carry out a putsch of the government. But de Gaulle was reinstated. He was a military man. He was gonna keep Algeria as a French colony. So de Gaulle gets into power, changes the constitution, gets the public to vote for him under the guise of keeping Algeria as France. But de Gaulle did exactly threw the whole thing into total and utter chaos. The Pied Noir and the military groups were right. They felt that de Gaulle stabbed them in the back, and that's exactly what he did, because de Gaulle's on TV a number of times, and I think there's still a lot of animosity today from the military. They haven't forgotten. Certainly the people that had to flee Algeria have not forgotten, because he said it was unthinkable. But because he basically changed the situation, and he started to open up and speak in their very twisted and convoluted ways, it became clear that Algeria was gaining momentum for independence. To me, it seems it was always planned that way. But so the secret army this OAS, they planned a coup d'etat, and it's claimed that they tried to assassinate de Gaulle. But for me, if they want to assassinate somebody, it will be done, no doubt about it. So I don't think there's any truth in that, because when the military was eventually pulled out, there were no more attempts on de Gaulle. So for me, it was just to create chaos, fear, terrorize the public. There was also bombings in France. There was a number of bombings in France from their own troops. The press were reporting that the paratroopers were going to land in France and overthrow Gaulle, leading to a civil war. It's just pure state organized terror. It's never been any different. So this is when the OAS with the regular military ramped up the state organized terror even more in Algeria. Algiers. So they started blowing up shops, they blew up cafes, they blew up buildings and houses. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's total chaos, indiscriminate slaughter. De Gaulle, I mean, this goes on for years. De Gaulle eventually pulls out the military and sacks some of the generals and the leaders of the military, but you know, I'm sure they moved into nice paid positions in big industry. Nobody was sent to prison. There was no inquiry. This was just crazy. And of course, then that left the Pied Noir high and dry in Algeria. And so they felt they weren't safe anymore, because now the Arab population were looking for revenge. I think the numbers and the footage kind of this, that there was 1 million Pied Noir gave up all they owned and fled to France in fear of their life. And also the Arabs who fought on the side of the France for years, for hundreds of years, had to flee for their safety. It was utter chaos, and this led to more looting and burning. But yeah, you have to watch this. It's fascinating, and listen to the lecture. It's fascinating. But you have to really wonder why Quigley doesn't mention this. I mean, 1.5 million people were killed in this war, and it was a war. And another thing which is connected to France here, which Quigley omits, is that many countries across Europe collaborated with Nazi Germany. France under the Vichy government is a prime example, and Quigley tells of this underground resistance groups, which were undetected or not noticed by Dulles or the OAS. Now, this comes straight from this Yale University lecturer, but he said that the resistance is a myth. It's totally a myth, because it was fairly overwhelmed. Of course, there was resistance naturally, but it was a very small minority, because it was overwhelmed by the high-level collaboration from the royal houses, the legal system, big business, of course, local businesses, and of course, the people just follow their leaders. So, yeah, so the French police and military hunted down Jews and communists, aided by intelligence networks gathering information from the locals. These people were shot or deported just for their religious or political beliefs. Many were sent to their deaths in the concentration camps inside and outside Germany. The Nazis were all too glad to have the French authorities act on their own initiative, and it is claimed by this Yale University professor that France was as anti-Semitic, and it even passed anti-Semitic laws in the 1920s and in the 1930s. The Freemasonic lodges in France were also targeted. Doctors, magistrates, lawyers, teachers, musicians were all rounded up by the French and either shot or deported, thousands of them. According to the number, about 80,000 or something from France. And remember what Hitler said, that he didn't want a nation of intellectuals. He wanted a nation of obedient workers. Typical Marxist, Leninist, Stalinist tactic. Wipe out the intelligentsia, because they are the ones who have an insight into this agenda. So you have to eliminate any resistance. Yeah, and it might have been Melissa that mentioned this character, Francois Mitterrand. Is another character who stated, he also said that the EU, when it was being implemented, because he was the president at the time, that the people must be in a kind of state of hypnosis, so they couldn't comprehend what was happening. You see, because they create chaos, they create confusion, and they can push anything through, because we're just in a hypnotized state. But Francis Mitterrand was a Nazi collaborator under the Vichy government, and then he was, fast forwarded into the future. We've got a telescopic lens. He's then marketed as a progressive socialist, or whatever they coined for him. Totally corrupt. These characters are always the same. They're completely corrupt. President, there's lots of information about him today. And I think for me, it's clear that Quigley doesn't want you to see there's massive collaboration across the board. He doesn't want you to see it. Yeah. I think I just noted here. Yeah, assassinations. This follows on to what I'm going to say next, because assassinations are a vital part of their control structure. Quigley tells you that himself. I know we've been going on a bit here, and I don't want to go into it too much, because I know we're going to be looking at Alan's work on Waiting for the Miracle, and he goes into this. But we can research a group called the Fehmgericht. Sometimes it's spelled Fehmgericht, sometimes spelled with a V. It's the same pronunciation. Fehmgericht. It means a secret court. And Alan tells you in Cutting Through the Matrix that they are the German equivalent of the Roman Catholic courts of Inquisition, and they financed Corporal Schicklgruber, which is Hitler. It's his grandmother's name, Schicklgruber. I think it's actually a Jewish name. I mean, it's crazy. But so this is a court of justice, and actually the word Fehmgericht, it basically means political assassination in Germany. So they're a secret court of justice. This goes back to Charlemagne, and it's alluded that it goes earlier, but they carried out assassinations. They held secret courts all across Germany, way back into the 800s AD. I mean, they terrorized the local villages for hundreds of years. They had people living in utter fear. I mean, talk about eugenicists. This court was brutally eugenic, I'll tell you that. But more on that later. So we go into Britain now, and yeah, I didn't agree with what Quigley was saying about that most generalizations concerning Europe don't concern Britain. For me, it's the same. It's the same system. It's the same culture. But Quigley does tell us that it's the same old story in Europe and Britain. High inflation, high cost of living. increased production led to lower farm prices and decreased in incomes, and the farmers are blocking the roads of the cities. They've been doing that in Britain and Scotland for ages. The farmers block the roads or the cities or city streets with their tractors, and the farmers will never learn that it's never going to work. You're wasting petrol, you're wasting oil in your tractors, you're just pissing off the people. You're blocking the roads. Maybe if you were to surround the Parliament buildings, maybe just drive around there in a complete circle. I'd say yeah, but just blocking up the roads from the people who need to, who are buying your product, then it doesn't make sense. So it's clear that that's also an orchestrated event. So the farmers they're not thinking for themselves. And I've tried to say this to them in my own experience as well. But it's unfortunate for them. But yeah, Quigley tells us that the economic expansion led to many in Britain. It led to many social problems, increased traffic, juvenile and adolescence delinquency, decline in adult moral behaviour. The economic expansion was attacking the old economic bases of industry and finance, and yeah, it's true. It's absolutely true. So I seen in Britain too. I mean, the industry was being shut down when I was growing up. The coal mines were shut down. The shipbuilding industry, the fishing industry affected my family, closing down, just closing it down, shutting it down. Your industry is being sent abroad, and it's the same as happening here in Germany. There's no doubt about it. To keep on pulling out articles and reading about all the certainly the big car manufacturers. They're off to China. We need better ties with China. So it's exactly the same. It's incessant, and the people are sleeping, unfortunately, because they're being moved to the next paddock to chew on the cud of social welfare. I mean, what else are they going to do? They're going to, if they haven't got any job or any future, and they need to feed themselves, they're going to accept any system that the owners of the system put in front of them. So there's really nothing they can do. What I saw as well, that there was certainly, when I was young, it had already been done, and certainly looking into it, there was an enormous amount of Chinese and Indian people flooded into Scotland in the 60s. Alan talks about this as well. I've confirmed that myself, but they seem to be taking over the high-level positions in industry, doctors, university professors. And I think Alan is absolutely right. It's certainly something that I found truth in, that their cultures, they do sacrifice for their children. It was interesting listening to Melissa there say the same thing about her middle class upbringing, because certainly in my very working class upbringing in Scotland, we knew our place. You knew you weren't getting out of that working class environment. So it's interesting there, because that's something that I've certainly seen as well, that these cultures do sacrifice themselves for their children, and it's deeply ingrained in their culture to allow their children to go to the best schools, get the best education. I don't think this was just in Britain, but certainly it's something that I'm aware of. But in Britain, Tragedy and Hope tells us that the old system was to be upgraded, and this was done through a class struggle, of course. Melissa touched on this as well, allowing the masses to achieve a high status. So they were able to achieve a perceived wealth with lots of hard work and industry, and I think it helped in Britain if you had a hand grip. We've been talking about masonry there, because in Britain it's not what you know, but it's who you know. But Quigley again mocking the people. He tells us that the new class were aping their betters, so it's monkey see, monkey do. We're buying country houses, sending their children to boarding schools, adopting the posh accent, riding around in horses and the likes, following the stars, because that's what we like to do. Yes, and he tells us, Quigley does tell us, that this was part of an economic, academic, and political revolution. See, it was revolutionary. This freedom of credit, it definitely changed society, this merging of the classes, and it began in the writings of the Labour Party intellectuals. Funding or finances just became available from abroad, Quigley tells us. Amazing. Insurances, pensions, profits, and other enterprises. And this is quoting Quigley now. Giving the energetic man, or a group with a good idea, or groups with radical ideas is even better, which I think. And these funds will just be released for you. No doubt, if you've got perfectly radicalized ideas, revolutionary ideas, you won't fail. So this was out without anyone much caring for established social precedents. And Quigley calls this a rebellion against English conformity. Quigley also tells us that the educational system is a class system, just like the political system. If you can't pay, you can't play. And France is exactly the same. That the system only benefits the wealthy. This lecture proves that, and it's probably the same in the States. In the United States, it's probably the same in the world. This system is designed to only benefit the wealthy. And of course, Quigley tells us that these revolutionaries come from no noble lineage. They're trained at Eton with close ties to the Milner group and the Round Table groups, and it's true where revolutionary leaders are always supplied to us. I mean, Quigley, Pike goes into that. He says something along the lines of, "We'll be the masters of the masters of revolution. We'll be masters over the masters of revolutions." I didn't have time to go into any of these names that Quigley give us, so I'm not too sure if anybody can. One name kind of popped out at me. It was this Lord Brand, so I didn't know, because generally when you go into these names, they're all related. They all tie back to nobility, and they're within our sphere of popular news today. You generally find that with these characters, but this Lord Brand, and I wondered if he was connected to this character, Russell Brand, who's, I don't watch him. I just see his face pop if I'm watching some video and something on some channel there. He pops up and tells me he wants to, defecate on me or something. It's disgusting, these people. But there's a couple of things that Quigley said at the end there. He did tell us about the sinful lives of cabinet ministers with prostitutes who met Lady Astor's Cliveden. Now, if you dig into that, Quigley calls one of the nicknames for this round table groups was called the Cliveden set. Now, if you look into Lady Astor's, Lord Astor's Cliveden mansion, it's in, you get this information from The Fifth Man. That's right, Roland Perry's work, again, another book that Alan told us to read. Basically, the book is about exposing Rothschild as the fifth man when lots of spies were defecting to Russia. But basically, a couple of the characters, I think it's Donald McLean and Guy Burgess and Kim, forget their names right off the top of my head. But anyway, these spies are are all whining and dining, and the intelligence agencies are well with it, right in these kind of circles into the asters. And it is well known that a few of these spies working for the British government who defected to the Soviet side were just, completely deviant, homosexual, into all kinds of deviant behaviour. And so I think Quigley knows. I think he's given us little hints here about the characters that maybe he's swinging in. I have no idea, no proof of that. But certainly these characters that are operating these round table groups. And I just thought this was total BS when he said this about the British here. He said that this should occur in the country that offered the world of the 20th century its finest examples of self-disciplined response to the class of social study would indeed be a profound tragedy. And I immediately thought to myself, if you want to find out about the royal houses in Britain, you can't do better than read a book. Now, Alan doesn't mention the book. I had to dig and find it myself. But he does mention the film, and the book is called Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution, by Stephen Knight, who he does mention in some of his blurbs. But the film, because we're talking about Hollywood films, if you want to watch it, it's called From Hell, and stars Johnny Depp and Heather Graham, I think. But basically, if you watch the film and then you read the book, you'll see that every little nuance out of the book, into the minutest detail, is put into that film. It's well worth watching. Every truth is in that film. Of course, it's dramatized, but the book, and there's actually a good interview. I think what I'll probably do is maybe post some things. I'll definitely send Melissa some links about this. There's a good interview done on Australian TV about Stephen Knight, and Alan told us that he was taken out after he wrote his second book on it was called The Brotherhood. So he exposed Freemasonry, and of course, I think he went over. He exposes some stuff in Freemason in that second book. That I didn't agree with him. I thought he pushed the boat a bit too far, and he's made himself a target there, and it looks like he was taken out by a hit and run. We don't know who it was, but he was certainly killed. But that really shows up what Quigley's saying here about the British class, or a certain class of people at the top. Unfortunately, it's always corruption. But yes, I didn't have time either. I wanted to look into the Nassau Conference, because that's an interesting name that we'll get into. But that was with Kennedy and Macmillan in Bahamas, strengthening the NATO multinational force. So I think that's pretty much everything I've got to say on Quigley's work. But a few things that I just thought about as Darren and Melissa was speaking there, and just to wrap this up into the conclusion, because I've been kind of thinking about what to say in the conclusion here, because there's lots of information, you could take it everywhere. But Quigley does mention a book which Alan tells you to read about 10 or 20 times, and he's right, because although Quigley's work is a great book, I think there's lots of obfuscation. I think he's holding back something, and it's clear for me, because he doesn't want you to see that there's threads that run through all of these systems. It doesn't matter if it's Japan or Britain or capitalism or communism. It's the same clique that have always run the show. And in George Orwell's 1984, I think this little book exposes more than all of Quigley's work, and certainly Tragedy and Hope. I haven't studied any other of Quigley's work. It's definitely an author that he's definitely somebody that I'll possibly read now. I have got other books, but in George Orwell tells you in his little paragraph here, this is deep into the book where Winston is reading Goldstein, I think it is Goldstein, his book, the famous book that O'Brien gives him. And the first chapter, of course, is Ignorance is Strength. Throughout recorded time, and probably since the end of the Neolithic age, there have been three kinds of people in the world: the high, the middle, and the low. They have been subdivided in many ways. They have borne countless different names, and their relative numbers, as well as their attitude towards one another, have varied from age to age. But the essential structure of society has never altered. Even after enormous upheavals and seemingly irrevocable changes, the same pattern has always reasserted itself, just as a gyroscope will always return to equilibrium, however far it is pushed one way or the other. Orwell gives you more in this book. Now, you can read, if you know how to read between the lines, the Quigley is alluding to this, but he never tells you that it's just one system, and you would probably respect him more if he did there. But here I go with, I was deciding what to read, and then when Melissa said what she said about Alan, I thought, well, I will read it, because this is from Cutting Through the Matrix. This is what Alan says on history. History is the systematic telling of false stories about a series of apparently unrelated events that occurred in the past in order to create an erroneous public opinion about who, what, where, when, why, and how certain events took place. In fact, the telling of history was and is built upon a number of false premises which are intended to mislead us into believing that human beings have only achieved a sophisticated level of advanced technology capable within the last few centuries. As well, only the last 5,000 to 10,000 years at most since the birth of Caucasians, white men, is claimed as being the extent of human history. That is completely false. Humankind in its present forms is at least 190,000 years old. Now, Alan then goes on to mention troglodytes, and he mentions a number of human technologies, including freshwater diversions, hydraulics, plumbing, hydroponic gardening, transportation, communications, genetics, computing, optic, lasers, and holography. And I tend to just read through lots of old books, and we've got a cracking set of German lexicons, and as soon as you go into these books, these old books, you start to see that they actually give you this information, that these technologies, which can help and do help. I'm all for technologies that can help human beings, definitely. These things have been around for thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. I completely believe, Alan, it's the only thing that makes sense. Because every time I look into the historical data, you can see it. These technologies have been probably stolen from us. That's another point that I'd like to make. I think they've stolen all of our best ideas. They've then twisted it off. They've exaggerated it. They've then taken it away from us. Of course, we've got to take in the fact that there has been cataclysmic events on Earth. We know that. Alan goes into this too, but I do believe that these technologies are ancient, and we have created them, and they've co-opted them, and they hold them. So, but yeah. So basically, with wrapping up this conclusion here, for me, Tragedy and Hope is diplomacy 101. It's diplomacy for dummies. It's the ABC of diplomacy for me. It's written in a language of bureaucraties. It's basically what I see is it's a book that speechwriters or politicians, speechwriters of politicians will go to as inspiration. It's the authorized view, basically. And it's also written in the history of happenstance style for me. You know, we've just bumbled along, making mistakes. We must do better next time. Yeah, because if I go through my notes on this in many different areas, which I know I've came in quite late into the day, into the last two chapters here, but if I go into my notes, there's so much that quickly omits, and you know, I'm happy that I've done it. I'm happy I've put the time in to study it, and it's been good for me. I've definitely learned a lot, and I do think it's a good book. It's well worth reading. There's massive truths in it. But right at the end of the book, and certainly my one, there's these two words, the two last words: inclusive diversity. Now, he capitalizes, or the publishers capitalized the first two letters, the I and the D, and I thought, you know, somebody obviously knows there's going to be a hyperactive tracking and trace system implemented on us. There's no doubt about it. But I would change that inclusive diversity, and I would say it's an exclusive collaboration is how I would end that, and that's maybe what the European community is. It's maybe an elite club, and yeah, I think I'll just finish off here. I didn't know if I was going to read this too, but it's just a little paragraph in a book, because we've been talking about what's important in this, and trying to find purpose and meaning. And for me, it is all about thought. It is all about how we think and how we perceive things. It's very important for me. And this is something that I don't think Quigley will touch, because I think they're terrified of these things. But you may have heard Alan talk about the James Fraser's work, The Golden Bow. But this is from a book called The Silver Bow, and so it's from a Scottish woman. So she's basically going back to the Druids in Scotland, and through the just through the migrations of religions, really. So there's lots of interesting information, and in the notes, and this is what I do, I read all the notes as well. I'm a bit there. But it's interesting when you go into it. But just to finish off here, maybe there is a bit of hope. We'll put in the hope that maybe it's not in Tragedy and Hope, but so beyond the polar circle, in the heart of forlorn Finnish Lapland, lives a small tribe, the Skolt Lapps. Unlike so many primitive races, they have firmly rejected all efforts to bring them the comforts of our civilization. They will not even radio sets. They will not have even radio sets in their huts. The noise that comes from a box, they say, spoils the voice of the trees and the never-ending melody of the virgin forest. No wonder if nature, in return for their faithfulness, has preserved them in their old powers, which generally call second sight. You can have a look into that. Telepathy among them is a commonplace. It even enables them to make appointments with one another when they are miles apart. They dream of a place and time and meet as easily as if they had arranged it by telephone. A Skolt Lapp will look at you with his clear, transparent eyes, and he will see your real face, your second face behind the mask. At times, it makes him sad looking into other people's eyes to find something like a drooping flower in them, slowly fading from lack of care and proper watering. We need to know that on the confines of Europe are some people who preserve those precious powers we have had to lose in our constant endeavour to master nature. Now that's from a Swiss author called Robert Crotet. There's not too much written about that. Wikipedia is completely blind on it. They do mention something in German, but that's from a little article in Time and Tide in 1947. And there isn't too much to say about these people. They've been pretty much blanked out of history. There's some articles which I can post. They're tiny. There's one from the Guardian in Australia, but it looks like this. I was thinking to myself, why would the Russians and the Germans need to invade so far north and into Finland there? And I think it's because they're trying to destroy these ancient tribes there, who do have powers which I know Alan would call natural powers, but this system, and for me, people like Quigley, they're terrified of this. This is why they've just flooded our lives with just nonsense. They don't want us realizing that we have natural powers and that we can communicate in different ways apart from technology. So I think I've probably said enough. I'd welcome any kind of comments, or if anybody wants to say anything, then please do.
Thank you very much, Graham.
Yeah,
that's great. Very, very interesting.
Thanks.
I was following along and typing in and looking things up.
Yeah.
And, I found. I remember the Çatalhöyük, that
yes,
that site in Turkey, and
yes, that's right.
There's another one called Karahan Tepe or something. Very
yes,
but it's fascinating that they had the zodiacal symbols on there, those T-shaped stela, or what do you call those tall things again? Those obelisks.
Yes,
sorry.
Yeah, the obelisk. Yeah,
the obelisks. No, the obelisks everywhere, all around the site.
That's right.
The obelisks are, and the constellations and knowledge of the precession, and with the pole stars, and the great Platonic year. Mankind has been around observing and understanding nature and the sciences for a long time.
Yes, absolutely. No doubt about it. Yeah, that was. I had made some notes when you were talking, and you wrote about. I think it was when Quigley talks about the Basques and the Catalonians, and it made me reminded me of what Karl Marx wrote. Again about the Basques and the Catalonians, but also the Irish. Of course, that takes some Scots too. And the Ukrainians, they had to be wiped out. They had to be destroyed because those classes, those types of peoples, were far too rebellious. I don't know if you've read that yourself in Marx.
I haven't seen that directly from Marx.
Okay.
know that Alan referred to it as well several times.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
some people have just got this independent streak, and they stand together, and they've got like I suppose it's almost like a telepathy that's unconscious. They realize
Definitely.
who they are. They don't have to keep looking up in books who they are. They just
That's
know
right.
it, and they're
That's
willing
right.
to defend it or live it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's just some people on the planet that have held on to that feeling or spirit, and it flies in the face of globalism. Independence is not allowed.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's tough to be a smaller player in a global scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was interesting as well because, of course, we know what's going on in Ukraine at the minute, and those I knew some Germans who right at the start of that campaign were in there working as contractors. They were electricians, and they came back and basically said that NATO were the forces that were evacuating parts of Kiev. They couldn't see it. It was basically the NATO forces that were evacuating massive swathes of Ukraine, causing massives, and there was no troubles really in those areas at that time. So that was interesting, but just about the destruction, potential destruction. Of course, we were pretty blind. There was information getting out, but with the Catalonians, and certainly with the flooding that happened there recently, just last year. And I don't know. I did see some information about Ireland being hit by severe winds, but I know the severe winds are happening here too. But it's just interesting that these areas, and of course you've got the Hurricane Helene. I don't know if you've seen the pictures recently there. That's also Irish and Scottish descendants have went in there. So it's really interesting just to see this play out.
I think those areas that they are attacking, it's a case of breaking down the identity so that they blend in with the rest of the surrounding larger groups. It's if you just look at the countries of Europe historically, look at France. Is made up of 6 distinct, separate groups of people, and some of them still feel a bit different. But the French government will say, "You are French, whether you like it or not." And now with the Ukraine, I really do think that they are trying to, because Ukraine is sort of like a country that has been through psychological trauma, and the people there are in a newer sense of the word, forming or feel like a nation, and they got to break it down. I think that, in my opinion, the war makes no sense on many levels. I think it's a joint operation between the Soviet Union or Russia and the United States to simply pound away at the Ukrainians.
Yeah. Now, that was interesting what you said as well, and then quickly goes on. It quickly really plays this up, certainly in the chapters after World War. But I think with the United States and of course Russia playing the antithesis here. If you look at the GDPs alone, I mean, Texas is a GDP the size of Russia. Yeah. And if you look at the military budgets, I think Russia's claimed about 140 billion, and America's about 10 times as much as that, 1.3 trillion. And of course, Quigley tells us also that the back in Tragedy and Hope that America give Russia $10 billion dollars this lend lease, And then, of course, you tie that in with the likes of Anthony C. Sutton's work, who tells you that the Bolshevik Revolution, not just monies, not just financing from the banking, but actual engineering and engineering know-how to build the Russian system. So I really do think it's just a game. I think that the power seems to be, or certainly the financial power, what that means in military strategy, I'm not sure, but definitely the all of the financing is coming from the States, from America.
Well, I was just looking at old genetic maps, because they've been genetically mapping the world.
Yeah.
And you look at the history of the Normans, and people forget that the Normans took over Russia. They invaded
that's right.
the European, all the way down to Sicily. And also what's interesting is that the English have been used in those Norman armies throughout the rest of Europe. There's actually people moved around a lot more than we type that hovers around the Moscow area, and then you don't see that again until you get to London. So there's definitely a very, very strong Norman stronghold that set up shop in London and in Moscow. And Graham, Graham, I just wanted to just say that the thing about the Normans is the backbone to understanding Europe. If you take a look at this genetic map, I'll try and find it. There's a strong concentration of shared blood type, or genetic line that you see imprinted in Moscow and then in London. The Normans, so they've got the East, and in London they've got the West, and I think they've just been steering everything since.
And that's certainly.
And the Normans struggled with Scotland, so Robert the Bruce just came in later on to finish the job.
Alan is. On you go.
And also the unity between Scotland and England apparently was never formally actually signed. The document apparently wasn't signed.
That's right.
It wouldn't need to be signed because the people that were running both countries are the same people. So the poor old ordinary Scots and the poor old ordinary English were none the wiser.
But they didn't really care back in that feudal system as well. Melissa made it. That system worked. Whether you think of it as a slave system, a serf system, it worked. It worked, but it probably worked for longer than we've got history on it. The history tells us that basically the Highlanders adopted Christianity or the Catholic faith about 1,300 years ago or so. Again, these dates are they seem to conflict with the different books you read, but those peoples were strong up there. They had a strong family system, strong family ties. They knew they were in it. They knew they were slaves at the end of the day, but the system could not. Almost it was impossible for them to corrupt that system. Drugs were non-existent in
so much is actually known about these ancient peoples because even the Greeks had traveling historians who would go and map areas even before the Romans were in the area, and those recorded manuscripts must be somewhere in some important archive somewhere, and they have the real histories. I'd love to know what they say. It would be fascinating.
That's on you go, Melissa.
Oh, I was going to say, first of all, Graham, that was really interesting. That was terrific. Thank you. I really enjoyed it all. But what I was going to say was that Alan told me about the Highlands that the histories, this is really kind of the idea of the bard, that the histories were memorized, go one clan to another. And if they didn't recognize you, because they might not have seen you for years, or they might never have seen you, you had to be able to give a memorized oral history of your clan and any incidental interactions that it had had with the clan that you were visiting. You'd have to be able to memorize it and say it just like the genealogy in Genesis in the Bible, or you might be dealt with as being a...
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Alan's absolutely right there. The bards seemingly had such a memory that they could recite the genealogies going back, 1,000 years. That was claimed as far back as their histories could go. And your definite ways of saying things. The people themselves had, of course, great memories because of that, because they were continually, it was part of their entertainment. It was really the poems and the songs was part of their histories, which I'm sure was full of all sorts of things, but definite campaigning of wars. And just what Darren said there, the Scots diaspora definitely occurred through the military as well. They marched all across Europe, all across the world, to their marching songs. And of course, the Scots and the English, of course, inhabited lots of Europe just with their military. They would march. There's famous songs. They would just march 10,000 men on a military campaign and disband the military. And they basically say there was no money, so the people had to then migrate in, the mixing the cultures. So this is going on. They've had so many different techniques over the years in doing this, but definitely, yeah.
Graham, you have the East India Company, and you have the Hudson Bay Company, and you have all these companies.
Yeah.
But these companies go back way, way older. I forget the name of it. I'll find it, but there's an ancient Anglican or English church in Rome that goes back. That was a church for the merchants that were doing business in Rome, and this was way older, like 1,000 years ago, or something.
Yeah.
So people were all over the place, and they traveled wide, and they got around.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, we're not really told this.
The travel or the communication across the world is ancient, I believe, and I've got a little theory on this that I've been working on, but we'll maybe keep it for when we get into Alan's book. But it's definitely inside of the earth. Of course, we have these allusions to telepathy, which I do think we have of these powers. There's no doubt about it. If certainly if you're sitting with someone and you're speaking to someone, you see their body language, you see how they move, you see their eyes. I think we can read each other, but you have to have this contact. You have to have this human contact. You can't tell over the phone. I think one of Melissa's guests, Rick, mentioned that I thought that was a good point. He's a good kind of ear for picking out a tone of truth. And I think there's a lot in that. I do think you can, over the telephone and hearing voices, you can hear truth in someone. And I suppose why some people are adverse to bullshit from the politicians, because you can hear those guys just lying.
Graham, it's definitely true, because insurance companies actually can run it. First time you phone in for a claim, they can pick it up. They got technology that can tell whether you're being truthful or not.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're so easily read, aren't we?
If you think of you are standing watching a group of dogs interact with each other, animals.
Yeah.
If there is a suitable or wide enough intellectual gap between people, there will be people that will look at other human beings in that fashion, and because they're simply on another level. So I all these massive boring books of bureaucracy and all the reams and reams of things that are put together in this modern world that make us dizzy when we try and open them up. They're all written by somebody, and they're put together by people that do have a very high intellect. There is another class of people on planet Earth that we don't see because they are out of sight from most of us, but they are there, and they're very, very powerful people.
Yes, they're definitely. But I remember that you remind me of something you said earlier on, or maybe it was in one of your talks with Melissa. You mentioned something about this, the communication between birds. This, of course,
Oh yeah.
Nature. I can't exactly remember what you said, but it's experience that I had, and it's probably better just explaining my experience. But in the back of the house here, sometimes on a number of occasions, we have lots of wood pigeons around here, and they don't do it all the time. A wood pigeon is pretty much a kind of a bird that they do. The doves do kind of come around in pairs, but it's technically a bird that you see nesting on its own or flying around on its own, and they can be a bit of a pest in the garden too, and they can come down and devour your salads that you've recently planted or whatever. So they can be a bit of a pest, but they're nice birds. I do know they're, from time to time. I mean, it must be 1,000 of them, probably more. I don't know. Just a whole flock of them. They come down and they fly and they land all at the same time, and they'll do their pecking away. And in one split of a second, it's actually a noise which sounds like a clap, because they all take off at the same time. And they spin, they spin around in a circle, and they come back, and then they land again, and they'll do this maybe 2 or 3 times. It's fascinating to watch. The most fascinating thing is they're not even looking at each other, but they can take off at exactly the same time. This is fascinating to watch.
And you know something, we might be fascinated by it, but it's completely ordinary. I mean, we shouldn't really be fascinated by it. I mean, we have radio waves, we have waves of light, bands of light that we can't see, and we know that animals can see certain bandwidths of light that we can't. And the brain wave, that human waves are measurable, and they travel, and they have a wavelength, and they leave the body. So our nervous systems can transmit and receive waves. It's just something that don't use very much, and I think if you come attuned, like those people that you mentioned, I think it's something that most of us can learn to, to have. I mean, we only seem to experience it when there's a strong set of emotions and danger or sadness or something. Yeah. But I think we are receiving a lot more, but we just don't know that it's coming from another person. We put it down to anything else, We might even put it down to just a little health issue, like, oh, I felt this thing. Yeah. I must, maybe I should go and take a headache pill or who knows what, And meanwhile, it's communication.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you come from a society that's very, very sensitive to it and recognizes the signals, then you can identify that it is communication taking place with confidence. Yeah, we mustn't deny it. We must, if we have these little lingering doubts and experiences, we must stop, think about them.
Yes, I think
you know, when you look behind your eyelids, you can actually get visuals, you know, you can actually see. Yeah. So it's not make believe, it's not fantasy, it's not, it's real. And you never feel embarrassed about mentioning it, you know.
Oh no.
Yeah.
No, you are right. Alan talks about this as well, and we get these visuals of we have these different words, this aura around us. That, it's a bit new agey, but I do understand. I do believe we have communication or forces or whatever you want to, whatever vision you've got in your head, but they do emit out from us, and we are actually much larger than the physical bodies. It's only part of it. I do feel that I've seen myself.
I think the length of a human brain wave is something like 432,000 kilometers. That's what I remember reading. It's something bizarre. So if you think if you have a thought and you project it to to the moon, it gets there quick.
Yeah,
it's gone way past the moon. I'll have to recheck that figure, but it is something quite bizarre. And who knows what we might be receiving from elsewhere? Who knows?
Yeah, true.
Anyway, that's another story.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say goodnight. It's now Sunday for me. So
we're a bit late.
Catch some shut-eye.
Yeah.
Well, this was great, everybody. Thank you for being here. And I think we're going to just keep going. We haven't set a time, but I'm amazed we did it 14 months and lots of effort, but this has been a really great learning experience for me.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.